This is part 4 of Unit 2 lecture notes. Where we last left off, we said the war kind of ended with the Battle of Yorktown. After that, kind of support for the revolution in England collapsed. To keep the war going, there was no longer a lot of people in England that wanted it. They said, it's not worth it, let them go. And so let's talk about then kind of what happens in the years immediately after the revolution, or kind of the effects of the revolution, so to speak. The Treaty of Paris, if you ever come across that, there's lots of treaties in Paris, but this one in particular is what formally ends the war between us and England, and there's a couple things you need to know about that document. First and foremost, it says that America is free and independent. We're our own nation. We no longer have ties to England, that kind of stuff. It formally gives us our independence. It sets the borders of the new nation, which is kind of an important deal. And it also says that Britain has to withdraw its troops. Okay, now that's just the United States of America. Britain's still going to have troops in Canada, but it says, this document says that Britain is supposed to remove its troops from the frontier primarily, which is the lands west of the Appalachian Mountains, and then any cities or ports in the other 13 colonies as well, and says this is the borders of the new nation. Okay, which was pretty much most of it was the 13 colonies, and then what we call today kind of the Midwest. So that land from Mississippi east is basically the border, and then you have the border that we have with Canada still today. Now Britain's going to kind of renege on that. They're not going to really withdraw them, but they're supposed to withdraw their troops. We'll talk about that in subsequent chapters. Okay? Loyalists, these were people that had remained loyal to England. They were supposed to be compensated for their losses. What often happened to loyalists is their houses were burned or looted, their businesses were destroyed, these kinds of things. And so these people were supposed to receive compensation from the new government of America, and that didn't really happen much either, but they were supposed to. That's in the document. The first government that we had then is called the Articles of Confederation. This is the first government of the United States. This actually was begun while the Revolution was still running. It was all the 13 colonies had say and so forth. And there's a lot of things that make this different, but there's a few things you need to remember other than this is the first government the United States had. It was the first constitution. A constitution is just a rule book for your government. It was the first rule book that we had. It said this is what the government can do and cannot do. That kind of thing, just like your handbook basically does for you. One thing to very much remember about the Articles of Confederation is that it was a very weak government. Okay? And the question on the board is why? Why do you think their first government that they created would be very weak and not have a lot of power? And if you think about that question, it's fairly simple. They had just fought a revolution to get rid of a very strong government, a government that was placing a lot of rules on them. So it just makes sense that when they replaced that oppressive government, they wanted one that gave them a lot of freedom and not a lot of rules. So the Articles of Confederation was very weak. For example, they couldn't force colonies or states, they were called, to pay taxes, for example. You were supposed to pay taxes. You were supposed to give us money so that the national government would have money to defend the country and build roads, but they couldn't force them to do that. And then also, most of the things had to be unanimous. Most of the rule changes had to be unanimous. Well, you have 13 different states with lots of different types of people and different interests and different things going on. Trying to get all of them to agree to anything was nearly impossible. So the Articles of Confederation, you need to remember that that's a very weak government, and that'll become more into play when we get to our next unit. Excuse me. As you can see here, this government's not going to be around very long. It's too weak. It cannot create any order or harmony. It can't get anything done. It's quickly going to be replaced because it's inefficient. It can't get anything accomplished. It can't create any harmony. And what begins to happen is that unity created by the revolution start to dissolve, because now we don't have the common enemy. We all don't have England to hate anymore. So we start hating on each other and start disagreeing with each other. And that leads to some pretty nasty arguments within the 13 new states. And they quickly then realize that they have to get a new government. But again, that's a little bit more in the next unit. Our final slide then just talks about the changes in society brought by the revolution. Again, remember, was this war fought to get rid of Britain only, or was there fought because they wanted to change society? Well, the answer is, of course, some of both. But the question that you're going to have to be asked to defend is, was it more people fighting for the social changes, or more people fighting to get rid of Britain? Well, that's a difficult question, obviously, but then I'll be interested to see what you come up with. But here are some things that did change in society, and I'll give you a handout in class too, of reading on this a little bit that kind of gets a little bit more in depth with some of them. As far as women are practically unchanged by the revolution. They get a few more rights, but basically women again are going to be seen as property of men. Men kind of own most of the powers, most of the financial power. Women in some cases can inherit property, but they often can't own it, so they inherit and have to sell it, for example. Women aren't going to, of course, be allowed to vote. Women aren't going to be allowed to really voice their opinion. They're supposedly people to raise children and make sure kids, are decent people, but they're not seen as equals. They're going to get seen as a little bit more equal in terms of marriage. In other words, they're going to have some more rights when they have abusive husbands, that kind of thing, where people recognize that marriages should be more of a partnership rather than the man just saying, do what I say. That's going to still be the key, or they're still going to be the guiding principle, but women are going to have a little bit more recourse if the guy goes over the top and becomes really abusive. Society is going to say, okay, you can cut ties with them and you have some rights, and that kind of stuff. But women don't really change much because of the revolution. Blacks do not either. Both sides allow blacks to fight, and in some cases give them freedom for fighting. But not much. Not much is going to change. Slavery is going to remain intact. In fact, slavery is kind of ignored for the most part because it's such a touchy issue. And to be frank, there's not a lot of white people against slavery yet. That's going to become more in the 1800s than in the late 1700s. But some blacks are going to get some freedom, and that's going to, be important because those free blacks are going to show what they can do with their freedom, and that's going to lead to more people eventually speaking out and working to stop slavery. But blacks aren't going to get a lot of rights. You can see on the board here, they're going to fight for a gradual end to slavery. That's their solution. And with these free blacks first getting their freedom, they're going to lay the groundwork for slavery to end, but nothing really hard and fast changes immediately. Probably who benefits the most will be the common white male. Most of the states or colonies have an idea of Bill of Rights, that there are certain things that the government cannot do. What we call natural rights, rights that all people have, like Thomas Jefferson says, the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Each of these new state constitutions are going to have things written in them that says the government can never do this, they can't do that, so on and so forth. And that's going to protect a lot of people from abuses in government and abuses from wealthy people, which were common in England at the time and really throughout the world. The colonists pretty much are the freest people on earth, and these Bill of Rights kind of guarantee that these rights that we fought for, many of us, aren't going to be taken away now by the new government that is created. So that's something that you'll find that changes. And then here's a big one, actually. This was put forth by Thomas Jefferson and many other people too. But the idea of separation of church and state and tolerance of other religions becomes a kind of an American principle. You might remember I told you that the Puritans from New England were very early on very intolerant and often put people to death for other religious beliefs or political beliefs. And often they had a theocracy where government and church were hand in hand, and church leaders were political or government leaders too. Well, one of the concepts that comes about as the Revolutionary War is that church and state, or church and government, have to be separate spheres because it's too passionate. Religion is such a passionate issue. If we allowed those two to come together, it's going to really cloud the issue, and it's going to lead to a lot of problems. So this idea of separation of church and state, where we have it today, where we can't have prayer in schools really, and you can't have Bill of Rights on places of public property like courthouses and stuff. That's where this kind of comes from, and this really happens then. But it also means that the colonists are going to be fairly tolerant of people of different beliefs and faiths. Now this, of course, what they're really referring to here is primarily different forms of Christianity, not necessarily different religions altogether. They wouldn't be very tolerant, for example, of Jewish people or Islamic people that happen to be there. They'd be tolerant of, the difference between a Methodist and a Presbyterian, those kind of differences. Finally, the concept that government is to serve the people and follow what the people want becomes ingrained in American society and American tradition. It's no longer the people serving the government, but it's the people really running the show. The people have the power to vote. One of the things is almost all white guys are going to be able to vote pretty soon after the revolution, and that's what we're talking about here. This idea that the government is supposed to do what these people want, whether you're rich or poor, instead of the other way around, is a big experiment here in America that's going to end up clicking or working for us. But the concept that government should follow the wishes of the people and do what the people want is something that's going to be a big change. It's not just the people in power or the king saying this is what you need to do, you need to follow it. It's going to go the other way from the ground up. The people are the ones that are going to be able to say, hey, this is what government should be, this is what it should be doing, this is what it should like. It better look like that or we're going to change it. And that, of course, is what they thought that they did. They didn't feel that England really represented them well and listened to them, and so they got rid of it. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in class with this idea of the social contract. But these are some of the changes, social changes brought by the Revolution. We'll talk more of these as we go on a little bit more, because some of them are kind of recurring themes. But that's the end of Unit 2. Again, this is Part 4.